Back in the medieval times, there were castles, dragons, knights, and kings. And a lot of these characters would do a lot of action around castles with something called a moat, which is usually a body of water surrounding a castle. And there would be a drawbridge that only those allowed into the castle can go in the castle, but all the bad guys from other fiefdoms would have to stay out, and the moat helped the bad guys stay out of the castle. And that's exactly what a modern day company that would have a moat wants to do the same. They want to maintain their durable competitive advantage against the bad guys, aka competitors. And so the current company CEOs, like the kings of these companies, can enjoy being inside their company castle. You're listening to Investing Mastermind Podcast. I'm Michelle Markey.
And I'm Signe Lundholt.
And today, as you just heard of my little medieval storytelling, we're going to talk about this concept of moat and what it means, because it helps a company maintain staying power and the ability to keep earning money in spite of whatever their competition is doing. And what do you think, Sina, about this idea of moat?
Well, when we started the podcast here, I was very excited about where is this going? Am I in the right place? Talking about dragons. But I love how you explained it, to the listeners out there. And I also hope that you guys out there enjoyed that take on moat. So moat is actually one of the things that I think is the most difficult and time consuming about Warren Buffett's strategy to actually figure out what is a company's competitive advantage. Is it durable? Like you're saying, it actually takes some time to figure that out, where some of the other things doesn't necessarily take me as much time. And also see, when I do my workshop or sessions, that people I'm working with are really struggling to figure out what 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 is the competitive advantage of this company. It's also like, how do they compete? How can we see that they're better than their competitors so that they will end up as the winning knight of the that competition, because we want our company to be better than competitors, and we want our company that we're looking in have that advantage. And it is so incredibly difficult to actually find out how do they compete. And so one of the things that listeners can do is actually categorize the different kind of modes. And Michelle, I know that you, before we started recording, you were talking a little bit about some of the different modes, and maybe you want to explain and talk about, in order to actually define this very, very difficult topic, can you please share some of the categories?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger have defined an economic moat would be in terms of what's the sustainable competitive advantage across a certain kind of category. And some of them might have more than one category. So we'll talk through some of those. For example, there's the brand moat. So, brand, I think, would be fairly simple for people to wrap their heads around, because it's a brand that people know and trust. Like, famously, Berkshire Hathaway invested in Coca-Cola, which is a brand that I think everybody around the world knows. I don't think there's anybody in the world who doesn't know Coca-Cola. And this is a brand that people have trusted for over a century in drinking this brown, sugary beverage that people seem to just love. I know in some ways in the modern world, we're trying to get away from too many sugary sodas. But in spite of that trend, Coca-Cola has had brand staying power, and that's a powerful thing. And it is what helps Coca-Cola continue to dominate the market. Like, people could have Pepsi, they could have RC Cola, they could have miscellaneous kinds of cola out there that are trying to compete with Coca-Cola. But a lot of people will probably say, I still want a Coke. They might have very strong feelings and say, I don't want a Pepsi, I want a Coke. And that is the brand moat. That's the power that Coke has over
Hmm.
the consumer. So what do you think about this moat as a brand?
Yeah, it's definitely, some of the easier one of the easier competitive advantages to identify, right, whether a company has a brand or not a brand. So the way we see consumer behavior is definitely that, sometimes brands does drive more sales. So when people are at the store, or let's say in the movie theater, and I have to take my kids to the movie theater, and I can choose between like an independent animated movie, or I can also choose a Disney movie. And for me as a parent, I might choose the Disney movie because I know that this brand comes with quality. My kids will be entertained. It's going to be okay entertainment. Whereas I don't quite know about maybe some of the other movies that are, for this age range, whether they will be entertained. So maybe as a parent, I would, to make sure that this is going to be entertaining also for me, maybe that Disney movies usually have some, something adults can reflect on, then I would choose that brand because I know the brand. And that is a brand value that people kind of know what they get. So when you buy a Coca-Cola, you know what you get, you know the flavor. If you are standing in front of the refrigerator at the store and have to choose any of the drinks, there might be some flavors where you're like, sounds interesting, but I maybe have to save my money this month. I'm just gonna go with what I know, this brand, this Coke product, because I know it. You're not going to take any chances. So it's kind of, the thing about the brand is that people will choose it over other products because they know they're going to get either quality or something to do with their own identity. Like a Chanel bag has to do with identity. You can get a leather bag with the same kind of pattern, but so a brand is going to give you, one of those intrinsic needs that you have, or certainty.
Yeah, and similarly, even though I like using Windows computers, I'm an Apple phone user, which normally you often see people who have Apple phones also use MacBooks more, and people with Windows use Android phones more. But that's how much the Apple brand is meaningful to me, is I feel there's a certain sense of quality that I can rely on with the brand of Apple. So that's why I go to them for my phone. So it's a good call out, Sina, that you made there. And, speaking of some of these companies like Coke and Apple, that might be a segue into another type of moat called secrets moat. And we all know the recipe to Coca-Cola is fairly secret. I don't think it's very well known, even though there's a lot of copycats out there of Coke. But Coke, I think, closely guards its secret. And I'm sure there's a lot of patents and intellectual property of Apple that they maintain close to the vest so that not everybody can just recreate the Apple iPhones. So a secrets moat is also something that a lot of companies can benefit from, like say typically pharmaceutical companies, and also say certain manufacturing companies like 3M, which makes Scotch tape. And I'm sure they have a bunch of secrets in some of their products that can be very powerful.
Yeah, yeah. I had a client at some point, and he used to work on these big container ships. And he told me that 3M had this spray that would put out a fire immediately. So it just sucks all the air out of, or out of the room, and then they patented that. And that's kind of, when you're on one of those big freight ships, they have that kind of fire extinguisher because it will put out a fire immediately. So that's, 3M might not be necessarily a healthy business. They might not be good at, running a business, but they sure have a lot of patents, Gore-Tex, Tinselit. We can name so many different inventions coming from 3M, which is super exciting. So they have so many patents. But one thing I also, want to say about Coke that's a secret is that, have you noticed how whenever you go to a grocery store or a gas station, Coke is right in eye, in eyes view. So, or,
Mm-hmm.
you just reach out and you grab a Coke. It's right there.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that they pay for. They pay to be up there where your eyes can see and your arm can easily, or if a hand can easily reach for it. Whereas the products that you see at the bottom of the shelf didn't pay for it. So I don't know if it was Coke that started this, or if it was maybe one of the other like food companies, but it's a trend that started at some point where these companies started paying merchants to be right in eyes view, and there was done a lot of research on that, also working with consumer goods. I know about some of that research about how do you get people to purchase. Well, in a specific part of the store, depending on your product, and you have to be in a specific location where the eyes will fall, and where people are still fresh when they go into the store, and or sometimes it's when people are getting tired and want to go home, and boom, right there is that thing that'll give you a little bit of energy. So that's just one of the secrets that companies use as well, is that being at a certain, you know, position, or uh, somewhere in the store where that's exactly the moment that you, oh yeah, I need that, even though you don't need it, right? So, so, uh, so I think when it comes to the secret modes, there are some different categories, right? So it can be a process that's kept secret, or has been, where the process patented, or it could be that it's the ingredient, like we talked about the tinselate, and 3M has a lot of ingredients that they patent, or it could be a patented technology, so that, that technology, other companies can't use it. That's a pretty strong moats as well, even though sometimes that mode is not strong, because we've seen sometimes that things have been patented, but it's another company had another solution, a completely other solution, but people would get the same end results. So you got to, I think some of those companies out there are getting very, very good at patenting what needs to be patented, and then other things, might not, need to be patented, or getting a patent on that, because somebody else could come in and do something similar where people get the same result,
Mm-hmm.
but in use of another thing. So yeah.
Do you think that happened with some of the pharmaceutical companies and the weight loss drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy? I think a lot of them kind of copied each other. They might make a chemical compound ever so slightly different in the overall makeup. And then even though one started out with the patent, other people can copycat it because now your patent is made public, and all that another competitor has to do is change one little thing and it still gets the same end result. So in a way, I wonder if that had cut down on some of the profitability of some of these initially really uh, important medications that were like one of its kind, and now there are so many of them.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Also, what you're saying is, they just changed one thing, and then, the end result was the same. And once you also said, once the patent gets out there and gets published, everybody can see, oh, that's a new patent. And, there are some companies that are expert in, you know, just looking through which patents come out, and then they try to copy whatever. And China is notoriously known for the culture there, where it's sort of, they're proud to be copying. That's actually, when you can copy someone and create exactly what they created, that's actually, seen as a huge cadeau, a huge success when you can do that. So in that way, the patent mode sometimes can be fragile. It doesn't have to, but that's why this whole moat thing can be so complex, right? Is because, okay, so they do have a lot of patents, but does that mean it's actually a durable advantage? Yeah.
Yeah, it might not be in the case of some of these pharmaceutical companies or
Hmm.
ones
Yeah,
that
that was a great
try to
example.
thrive on secrets, but secret can easily come out if it's not guarded well. Like, uh, I know we should move on from secrets, but another secret moat is M&M. So the candy M&M is a closely guarded secret of the recipe. So you don't
Oh,
see many people coming out with M&M competitors. I know in Europe there's
oh yeah.
Smarties,
Yeah.
but in America you don't really see a competitor to
Huh.
M&M. So that's another good one that they were able to maintain the secret. I want to say, is it Mars who
Yeah, I
creates
believe it's
M&M?
Mars. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was in this in London. I was in this store where, they had a huge brand flagship store. You could go in and get your, photos printed on, and it was super fun. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah,
I wasn't aware of that. That's interesting. Thank you for
yeah,
sharing.
but they're not a publicly traded company,
They
so
aren't, it's a family owned.
yeah, so
Yeah.
they keep it closely guarded as a secret, and that's why they stay profitable and why we all know M&Ms and there's nothing else out
Just
there that's quite
in
like it.
Mars is just an incredible story. Absolutely. So inspirational. Yeah. Mhm.
And then another type of moat is called the toll bridge moat, where just like all of us who've ever taken toll roads or gone over a bridge and you had to pay a toll, like the George Washington Bridge going from New Jersey to New York City, you pay a toll and it costs a lot of money to go over this bridge because there's not many options to go into New York City. So, in a similar way, if there are some companies out there, often I think of telecom or utility companies that might fit this bill because you only have so many choices depending on where you live and what network is available. Like you might be able to choose T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon. There's some of those telecom options. And then for utilities, you might only have a couple of options if you're lucky. Like, say, for internet, you can choose Verizon or Optimum or Comcast. There might be very few options. Maybe you only get one option, and that's a toll bridge because you don't have any choice but to use the one or few available options.
That's so true. And even, with phone companies, it's actually only a few because one thing is maybe the brand that you're using, but they have to use the same kind of the lines from AT&T or Verizon or something like that. So that's so true. Even though you might have Mint or another company, they have to use some of these providers' network actually to give the service. So one of the things that Warren Buffett did in terms of this toll bridge, which is it's genius, but he has also mentioned some weaknesses with it. But it was when he bought, the BNSF Railroad or, freight company. So the toll bridge there is that when a company wants to have oil or dangerous chemicals, something like that, when that needs to go from A to B, it might be too dangerous to, use the normal road system where us normal people are driving around. So some of these companies, the only way that they can actually get, goods shipped from A to B is by train. And that's what he saw. And that's why he bought this train company was, okay, so if you need this chemical from the plant to the place where it's needed, the only way you can transport it is, using the train. So which is genius, right? It's a genius way of thinking about toll bridge. So with these companies, they have one option. Either, you pay for the train or you can't get your products to the people that actually need your product, which, is genius. But I remember, a few years ago, or maybe it was last year at the Berkshire Hathaway meeting, he actually mentioned that the downside that he had not thought about was that once the train has gone to B, it's empty when it goes back to, the plant. And how do we actually, you know, put some goods on the train from B to A, that might not be needed. It was a great initial idea, but it turns out now we have empty trains going back from B to A.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you deliver the product just like Uber rides and lifts. They bring a passenger and then they might not get another passenger if it's somewhere remote and no one's demanding a ride from that spot. So similar idea.
Yeah, exactly. I remember one year at the Berkshire Hathaway meeting, I booked a hotel and turned out it was like super far away actually from from the convention center. So it was so difficult to get, an Uber to drive me back to my hotel, and so difficult to find one to drive me back, and also, quite expensive because it was so far away, because they wouldn't have any work where I I needed to go.
Oh no.
Yeah, so it actually turned out, even though it was a cheap hotel, it turned out to be expensive anyway. And I learned from that experience. So I just in the future booked closer, very
Yeah.
close.
But that was a good example that the railroad is an example of toll road because there's not many railroads being built anymore. I think I heard Buffett say that the railroad industry has finally matured, like hundreds of years after it was done being formed, and then it was finally mature. So interestingly, it was now at a point where they're fully established. The useful lines that are going to keep earning will keep earning, but everything else is just whatever. Like, but the other flip side, in addition to the empty cars, is the amount of maintenance that has to be put into these. So even though it's probably lucrative to own a railroad, but then you have to continue to maintain them and the tracks and everything that goes into running them. So it's a very capital intensive business, and that's not to be taken lightly. It takes a lot to maintain that sort of moat versus, say, a software business. Maybe you have to change some servers and computers, whatever, but a software business is way more capital light than a railroad. So even though it's a toll road and not many people can get around that toll road, it's a very costly one also to maintain, and if you're the operator of it. So anyway, the final moat that I think we should cover is what's considered network. And a network moat is what we think of, say, if you're on Facebook or another network like TikTok. Some of these networks draw people in, and a lot of people want to stay there and be part of this network because they derive entertainment from interacting with others. And these companies can keep feeding the users ads. And that's how, in this network moat, they're able to continue generating a lot of money while people participate in their network.
Yeah, I like to call that also ecosystem, or, like the company needs some kind of stickiness. And again, drawing from one of my clients' examples is, he was the CEO of it's a bigger European company that does waste. Once the waste have been picked up, they sort it. And that's a company that, he's the CEO of, and it's a major European. They have, it's part of a major family-owned business. But what he told me is that those robots that actually today, sorts the waste, it's not people that are, sorting, it's robots that does it, and machines. And what he told me is that they had a certain brand provider, but if they needed to switch to another provider, they would have to, also get new people that could maintain those robots, because it was, two completely different systems, and that creates stickiness to that company. So he wouldn't go in and, he wouldn't be able to just buy one robot from that other company, because that would mean that his employees wouldn't be able to maintain it and operate it. No, then he would need new employees, or he would need, to, that the employees he had went on a course and was maybe gone from the business for a while in order to actually be able to operate the new robots. And that I thought that was so interesting, right? Because that puts him in a situation that when he has to purchase a new machine, he has to go to this, brand, or he can't get a new robot. So he kind of
Mhm.
needs to pay whatever they want to. And that's what creates that stickiness, that, network, that, you can't leave the network because you're kind of stuck.
Yeah, and that's also called switching,
hmm
switching mode. You wouldn't be able to switch very easily without taking on a lot of cost. So that's exactly the story of that waste management company with using very specialized technology. So it's hard to switch away from when you've already invested so much. You don't want to get away from what you put a lot of money into already.
hmm
And I know. Similarly, Apple and Android are also examples of switching mode. You want to keep using your Apple phone. You don't really want to switch to another one, even if you could. No, most people I know, they don't go back and forth every year.
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody will ever do Apple one year, then Android the next year, and Windows Phone or Nokia, or
Mm-hmm.
remember when there was BlackBerry? Like people don't switch to different phones.
Yeah,
So,
but I can tell you why. I made the big mistake that, my son has an Android phone and it's driving me crazy because whenever he's like, it's I have a time control so that he can only use certain apps for a certain amount of time because if not, like if I'm in a meeting or doing this podcast or something like that, he's gonna be gaming all the time. So I've created these windows where he can actually, but whenever he's like, "Hey, can I get more time?" and where it's like, "Yeah, you can." It takes me forever. Oh, I can't remember how I do it. And on the Apple phone, I know exactly what I need to do. And to set up his phone, you know, it took me a month, not a like, 24-hour a day, but and I was like, "Why did you do this?" Because with Apple, it's instantly I know what to do, it works. So you can hear that I'm part of the Apple cult. And, I'm not going to switch because it is so painful in time, in frustration. You know, it's costing me money. I should have just bought that Apple phone and paid for it, is what I'm thinking all the time. Even now, I'm still like, oh, I need to buy him that Apple phone and just get it over with.
yeah, cut him away from that early so that he doesn't get too used to Android.
Yeah, but he wanted an Android phone just because, he's a little bit of a rebel, which is, I
Uh,
kind of love that, want to go against, what everybody else does even, in the family, which
uh,
which is kind of, it's in a cute way. So and it is good to be your own unique person. But yeah, he might actually have to just do whatever I want and get that Apple phone. Yeah.
well, good luck. Maybe you'll see how hard it is for him to switch. Maybe it's easy, maybe it's not. That will be maybe another story for another time.
Yeah, exactly. To be continued.
Yeah, so I think that covers most of our moats for
Mhm.
today, unless you can think of any others that I didn't mention.
There are others, but I think these are the most important ones. Some of the ones, are more fragile or doesn't come from Warren Buffett himself. So I think this is, a good way to get started. And as you can hear, it is it's a difficult topic. It's difficult to find out, does this company has a switching mode? Does it have a network mode? Is it like you said, brand or what Warren Buffett he calls it a consumer monopoly? That's probably the easiest mode to identify, but it's also a very fragile mode. So, it's definitely, what you need to do is you need to reflect on this business. And when you look at the competitors, what is it that, the company that you're looking at, what is it that they have that no other business in that category has? So very difficult, but reflect on it. ChatGPT sometimes can help. It's not always that helpful, but
Well, and
it
some you can also think about what doesn't have a moat, like airlines probably don't have a moat because anybody can use any airline. They're not really loyal to any given one. It's whatever you can get to. Like you could stay loyal, but there's very few that can manage that. And even still, the profitability of a lot of airlines is not that great. So, that's another area you can go into is think about what doesn't have a moat.
great idea. Great idea. All right. Well, we hope that this episode was, beneficial, that you learned something. And next time we'll be talking about Warren Buffett's concept of margin of safety. So tune in next time and get some information on that so that you can continue your investment journey. And yeah, so we'll be out in about 2 weeks from now.
Till next time.
If you enjoyed the show and found the content informational, we would be super grateful if you would leave us a review and follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you automatically get new episodes in your feed.
The contents of the Investing Mastermind podcast are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. None of this is investing advice. And if you need help in your personal situation, please consult with a professional.